Hello and welcome to the Fuel, Run, Recover podcast, helping everyday runners fuel better, run smarter, and recover faster so you can reach your full performance potential. I'm your host, Stephanie Natchek, dietitian, fitness coach, and a fellow runner too. As the owner of Stephanie Natchek Performance Nutrition, I've spent the last 10 years helping runners learn to fuel their bodies, level up their running performance, and establish healthier relationships with food and exercise. If you're ready to reconnect with your love of running, then let's get started on today's episode. All right, welcome to today's episode where I'm going to be answering some of your listener questions. Now, these questions were submitted from my Instagram followers, so if you're not already connected with me at Steph the Runner's Dietitian, you can find me there and you can look out for the upcoming, usually on my Instagram stories. I will share a sticker with a call looking for some questions that you want me to answer on one of these Q&A episodes. So I've got some really great ones today. There's sort of a theme here that you'll see as we go through, which is great, that we can talk a little bit more in depth about some of the major questions that people have around carbs and sugars and cravings and, just trying to balance out their nutrition for running. And what I see a lot is that things can feel really difficult sometimes. We're trying to eat well as a runner, but find ourselves really hungry with lots of cravings. We're looking for alternatives and ways to kind of deal with this. And so you'll see from the questions that we have today that it's a really strong common theme. So hopefully your takeaway from today, you'll get some valuable tips from me, maybe a few things to consider, and that will get you fueling a little bit better. And of course, having that translate into better results with your running. So the first question here is, how do you feel about quote unquote cheat sweets? So the sugar-free, low-fat ice cream bars, chocolate bars. In that category, I also would maybe throw in like some of the lower sugar candies and products like that we're seeing on the market. So, I mean, as a whole, I feel pretty neutral about them. I don't really feel like they're a good thing or a bad thing. But what I wanted to do and what I put together here was a little list of considerations. So a little list of things that I want you to think about when you're kind of choosing your sweets or choosing your snack foods, some things that you can think about to just determine if they're a good fit for you, if they're kind of filling a need, if they're part of something that you want to include in your nutrition plan on a regular basis. So the first really big consideration, the most important thing that I want you to think about when you're deciding if you're kind of going with maybe what we'll call the cheat sweets, or if we're going with what we'll call the real thing, is, do you like them? Do you like the alternative? Because I know for me, I mean, I haven't tried every single product that's out there, but you have to really stop and think to yourself, is this as satisfying as the real thing that it's meant to be replacing? Do I truly enjoy this, diet ice cream bar or no sugar added chocolate, keto thing or whatever it might be? Do I like it? Is it as satisfying as the real thing that it's meant to be replacing? And that's really important because if we're talking about these fun foods that we have, right, these things in our lives that we eat just for the sheer enjoyment of it, we're not eating these foods for their nutritional value. I mean, we have the whole realm of food products these days that are like pumped full of protein, like, protein cookies and protein ice creams and treats that they've kind of jacked up with protein powder to make it feel like it's, I guess, not a treat or whatever. And, we can maybe do a podcast about those another day. But for these things that are just for fun, they're really meant to just satisfy a little craving, give us a little bit of enjoyment in our lives. And so if we're trying to take away something that we really do enjoy and like the taste of, and replace it with something that isn't really satisfying us, doesn't taste as good, isn't as enjoyable, then we're still going to have the craving, right? We're still going to be searching for the taste and the enjoyment and the experience of eating that real thing. So that's something important to kind of think about. Are we kind of just filling a void just to fill it, or are we actually accomplishing something with eating that food? And then the other really important consideration to look at is, how does the cost of these products compare to the real thing? So if we're paying a premium for something that doesn't have as much added sugar or is a lower fat or kind of alternative, if it is as satisfying, it's just as good, we really enjoy it, but it's maybe double, maybe triple the price, then that's also something that we maybe want to be thinking about. And is that something that we really want to be spending money on, or is it better for? And then the other thing that I want you to kind of think about and do a bit of a deeper dive with yourself is part of the draw of choosing some of these products is that you feel like you can get away with eating a bigger portion size for a similar number of calories. So is it that we're choosing some of these alternative because we can eat them until we feel much more full? We can eat them until maybe we're feeling kind of stuffed or maybe uncomfortably full, using them as something to kind of fill our stomachs and really fill us up in a way that is quote unquote less guilt or sort of guilt free. And you see that messaging around a lot of these products with, guilt free sweets or, enjoy the whole container and these big portions guilt free. And when that's the case, and we are choosing something that's kind of lower calorie so that we can consume a bigger volume of it, again, we want to be looking for like that satisfaction factor. And are we maybe missing something in our daily nutrition plan? Like maybe is something missing with our foundational nutrition habits, our meals that we're eating throughout the day, that's driving us to want to fill up on some of these alternatives and, feel like we're filling up on fewer calories, for example. Because if we need these things to fill our stomach because we're hungry, then that's often a sign that there's something missing from our day-to-day kind of meals and our day-to-day nutrition plan. And I'm going to touch on that in the next question that I'm going to answer, just sort of looking at what might be going on behind the scenes that's leading us to have a lot of cravings or a drive to consume some of these foods. But on that note, the next thing that we need to really look at is, are these cheat sweets even lower in calories? Like, what are the nutrition facts? How do the nutrition facts compare to the real thing or the regular version? Because sometimes, again, depending on the product, depending on the brand, if we actually look at the nutrition facts, they're not that different. And it can be amazing to see, this box of, no sugar added ice cream bars, for example, have the same calories as the regular version of these ice cream bars, but the low sugar or no added sugar version are, double the price, or you get half as many in a box. So we don't want to be kind of sucked in and taken in by the marketing around some of these products. What we want to do instead is look beyond the front of the box, the front of the package, where we see the marketing and the advertising statements around, no added sugars or higher in protein or whatever it might say. We really want to be looking at the nutrition facts panel and comparing that to what we would normally buy, so we can make a more unbiased decision and not get kind of sucked into the marketing claims or the things that the companies want you to know and the advertisements that they're putting forth on the front of that package. So we have to compare the nutrition facts and then, of course, the serving size. Because if the serving size on the lower sugar version is half as much, then of course the nutrition facts will look a lot better because it's talking about a much smaller portion size. So when we're comparing these foods, we have to do a little bit of detective work sometimes to really see what might be a better option. And the other thing we need to be careful of is, what are the replacements in terms of what are they replacing the sugar or the fat or some of those calories with in these food products, because some of them may not sit that well with us. So specifically, there is a line of sugar replacements. They're called sugar alcohols. And these sugar alcohols, for some people, can contribute to a lot of gastrointestinal distress. So GI issues with consumption. It doesn't take a lot for some people to have a sensitivity to these sugar alcohols. So we may need to be especially careful with the frequency and the amount of some of these, quote unquote, cheat sweets that we might be having to avoid these GI issues, especially, if we're talking about that in the context of running and maybe not being able to use these as like a pre-workout fuel source or something like that. And so then the question becomes, if we need to be careful with the frequency and the amount of the cheat sweets. But we also, at the end of the day, do need to be mindful of our portion and our frequency of regular things like chocolate and ice cream and stuff like that. We don't want those foods crowding out or replacing nutritious things in our diet, right? They should be just treats and fun foods that we include. What's the difference really? If either way we need to be careful about how much of this stuff we're having, then is it worth possibly the extra expense? Is it worth the maybe less satisfying flavor, differences in texture? Is it worth all of those things? So, all that to say that most of the time, these types of products really aren't necessary. Maybe there's a time and a place where they can be valuable, and there are certainly maybe some contexts where they're all right to have. They're certainly never going to be a bad option or something that I would tell people not to buy, except for, of course, looking at the expense and whether or not we actually like them. But if we don't really want a significant portion of our daily calories coming from regular products, or maybe these either, then I just don't think there's a huge difference in how we want to approach it. And we certainly don't want to be, filling a nutritional gap with a lot of these lower sugar versions or lower fat versions of things, because again, that is going to be not allowing us as much space in our diet for the nutritious things that we need to really, fuel our training, recover better, get enough protein, get enough fiber, and things of that nature. Now, one situation specifically that I just wanted to touch on in terms of, being careful about how much fat we're getting in might be when we are carb loading. And so, if we're carb loading for a race, we do need to be quite mindful of the amount of fat that we're consuming. So, we do, of course, need lots of carbs during a carb loading phase, as you can imagine by the name. It's much more carbohydrate than I think a lot of people are aware of. And it can be quite surprising when we look at a carb loading strategy, how much we really actually need, and it's significant. And so, if something like a low fat, ice cream, or I'm thinking sort of like a sherbet or sorbet or something like that, a frozen yogurt even, is a great carb loading food for you because it's higher in carb and lower in fat, then I definitely think there's a time and a place for that. But what we wouldn't want to see here is a product that maybe uses like fat replacements. I don't know how many of those are on the market anymore, but there may still be some around that are like fat replacements in foods. And then, of course, we don't want to be using any sugar replacements either during that phase because we need the carbs when we're focused on carb loading. So overall, opportunity and potential for just finding balance in our diet, meeting our needs as a whole with mostly nutritious foods. And then, of course, having our fun foods and our treats just as kind of the cherry on top of our basic healthy diet. And so that brings me to question number 2, which I love because it's a beautiful segue here. And so in terms of suggestions to like wean ourselves off of these treats or kind of get away from these treats, I think the biggest thing that a lot of runners struggle with is our mindset and our approach to fun foods, right? And this isn't really specific to runners. I think it's really true for a lot of the clients that I work with, runners or not, is that we have a very all or nothing mentality when it comes to our nutrition and of course when it comes to our training as well. So because we get stuck in this sort of good food, bad food, all or nothing kind of approach, then the challenge is trying to find the balance and the consistency with being able to include these foods in, moderate, reasonable quantities without feeling like we're going overboard. And so what we want to do is kind of take a step back from zeroing in and focusing too much on how many cookies and how much chocolate we might be eating, but instead look at what's the foundation of our diet. Do we have a fueling strategy as a whole that helps us prevent food cravings and helps us manage our sugar intake and manage our drive to eat some of these really tasty, high reward foods? And so what that looks like is eating enough to fuel our training. So having the foundation of our dietary strategy be enough energy to support our training demands, because nothing will give us a whole bunch of cravings, especially for really tasty, high reward things. Nothing will give us more cravings than not eating enough to support our training demands. If we're under fueling, then food cravings are going to be just a regular ongoing occurrence that we have to deal with. And so by just having a plan that not only incorporates adequate energy, timing of meals, we're getting enough energy when we need it. So fueling up before our training, eating for recovery after our training. And then, we want to get in enough calories, but the types of calories are key as well. So specifically, two of the nutrients that are most important for helping to keep us full are protein and fiber. So we want to have a nutrition plan that is supportive of our overall training demands, enough energy, enough protein, enough fiber to meet our needs, keep us full and satisfied between meals. And then it's truly amazing how much of that can help with just preventing cravings overall. So rather than needing to willpower ourselves to weaning ourselves off of these foods and not being able to have them because we feel so out of control around them. Instead, if we can focus on, having the foundation of a really balanced and adequate dietary strategy, the value here is that we don't have to work as hard to maybe limit our portions of treats or just be mindful of our portions of treats. And then it makes it easier to include them in our diet, include them in our lives in reasonable quantities a little bit more often. So we don't have to have this all or nothing mentality. We don't have to have this very difficult relationship with sugar and fun foods and stuff like that. We can enjoy moderate amounts of the foods that we love as an addition to that foundation of a healthy, balanced diet that adequately fuels our training. Here we can see the benefits in terms of how we feel about our eating and how much easier it can be to navigate our daily eating choices because we're not struggling with these cravings. We're not struggling with this overeating, undereating cycle that so many runners find themselves in. But the other value here is that it also can get us better results in the long run. And so that brings me to question number 3. So the third question that was submitted, which again is just a wonderful segue. I love the theme that came in today from all of this is, do you work with clients whose main goals are losing body fat, but also improving performance? And again, this is something that so many runners are striving for, and exactly where they get stuck, like the individuals who submitted questions number 1 and number 2, is that we're trying really hard to diet and exercise for like weight loss. We're trying really hard to eat less and move more, which if you've listened to episode 1 of this podcast, then I go into much more detail about the downfalls and the pitfalls of getting sucked into the eat less, move more mindset. But a lot of runners are, having that all or nothing mentality and specifically being told time and time and again that the best way to achieve weight loss, the best way to reach their goals is, of course, by eating less and moving more, but also specifically reducing the carbs that they're eating. So that is what is really a fast track for a lot of people to this undereating, overeating cycle or some of the sugar cravings and the really difficult times we have with managing our sugar intake is because at the back end of our fueling plan, it's just not adequate enough. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that at this point in the work that I do, most of the clients that I see, their goals are simultaneously wanting to improve performance and then also improve body composition. And so what that specifically would be, improving body composition, is building muscle and reducing body fat percentage. And so using these specific fueling strategies that I just outlined, making sure that we're eating enough to support our training, filling up on high protein and high fiber foods. And yes, that includes carbs in that amount. Getting in the right nutrition when we need it. So looking at the timing of our meals as well. And then not being overly restrictive with some of the foods that we enjoy, because we don't want to be getting sucked into this binge restrict cycle that can really keep us stuck and be so detrimental to us reaching any of our goals here, not only in terms of the physical goals and the performance goals that we have, but also just in terms of our relationship with food and exercise. That really is something that at this point in time, I almost specialize in. And so working with clients who do want to see improvements in all of these areas all of my programs and services can be really tailored to those specific goals. So, whether you sign up for my Fuel for Runners online course, in that course, we go through the importance of eating enough to fuel your training. And we talk about some of the pitfalls of not fueling adequately and the cycles of dieting and all that we can get into. We specifically go through what to eat before, during, and after training. I've got sample meal plans, recipes, all kinds of ideas for specifically translating this information into action steps and sort of translating all of the theory around what we need to eat and when, and actually giving tangible tools and resources to do that. And then, of course, we talk about going beyond the numbers and not needing to focus as much on the day-to-day numbers and, tracking calories and stuff like that. And instead, what are some of the visual tools and resources that we can use instead to eat well, eat in a way that is adapted to our training day to day without needing to be sucked into using apps and programs and stuff like that to track our food for the rest of our lives. So in the Fuel for Runners online course, you can find all of that. And of course, so much more that we talk about, including vitamins and minerals and hydration and all of that, intra-run hydration and electrolyte strategies as well. So that is the Fuel for Runners online course. Then, of course, in the Fuel Train Recover Club, which is my group program, we've got modules on all of the nutrition components that go along with becoming a great runner, the very best runner you can be, as well as, of course, the training and the recovery components that are part of that program too. And in that program, you get access to weekly office hours where I'm available to sit down and chat and answer your questions. And we have live coaching calls as a group where we talk about some of this stuff even more in depth and get even deeper into it. So those are both great options for people who want to get started on that path to better performance, better body composition, but really in an environment that allows you to develop and sort of protect a healthier relationship with food and exercise. That's my ultimate goal, is to allow runners that space to enjoy their eating and enjoy their training, because that translates directly into more sustainability and longevity in this sport that we all love so much, or hopefully you love it as much as I do. And so that brings me to our next question for today, which is another really, really good one. How to ensure you're getting enough fuel without stressing over the numbers. And I think this is so great because as runners, a lot of us tend to be very numbers and data focused, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, it's great in today's day and age to have some tools to track things and to know where we're at with our training and our fitness. And I think that it's, definitely a benefit a lot of times to have the technology that we have available to us. But there's always that balance of, are we getting too reliant on the technology, and are we able to use the data in a way that helps us in the long run actually make better decisions about our training or about our nutrition? And that's really the key. So in a previous episode where I talk about, do athletes need to track their food? And so if you go back and listen to that episode about food tracking, there is where I kind of break down the pros and cons of tracking as a whole and the pros and cons of using tracking apps, and kind of, if you do want to do it, how to maybe do it in a way that actually is valuable and actually gives you some information that you can use. But there needs to be something else, right? Because tracking, regardless of how much you like it or don't like it or whatever, we all have to agree that it is a lot of work. It can be a lot of work to make sure that we have the numbers correct. It also can be a lot of work to continue to track long term. And so we want to be able to transition to maybe some easier things that require a little less time and energy day to day. So the first tool that I really like is called the Athlete's Plates. And of course, in both the Fuel for Runners course and within the Fuel Train Recover Club, and of course with my one-on-one clients too, we use the Athlete's Plates to adapt our nutrition strategy day to day, adapt our portions day to day to meet our training demands. And so it's a great visual tool that I really love, because it kind of gets us away from needing all the numbers, all the data, all the tracking, but we can still ensure that we're meeting our needs. And acknowledging that those nutrition needs are going to change, depending if we're doing a 30-minute run or a 2-hour run. And it allows us that flexibility and adaptability. The other thing that I really like to use for a little bit of tracking, but sort of in a much easier way that's a lot less labor intensive, is to look at using something like a photo journal for our meals. So, we all have our phones in our hand most of the time throughout the day. So being able to just take a quick picture of what you're eating. If you are working with a coach, if you're working with a dietitian who is providing you with some feedback on that, then it's great. You're able to share it with them. And I know for me as a dietitian who specializes in this space, I think that really helps us, again, take the numbers and sort of the targets, but translate it into real life food decisions, which is so wonderful and so valuable. So again, if you want to hear more about my thoughts on food tracking and all the ins and outs of that, then definitely check out the episode, Do Runners Need to Track Their Food? It's here in season 1 of the Fuel Run Recover podcast. All right, so for our next question, we are going to switch gears just a little bit, getting away from talking specifically about nutrition and carbs and some of that to a training-focused question. So this next question is about tips for beginners and getting started. I know that there's a lot of new runners that are on my Instagram and listening to this podcast, and I think it's so great to get into the sport of running and really want to start on a great foot and to start in a way that is going to allow you longevity and sustainability in the sport. So learning right from the get-go how to run properly, how to strength train, how to kind of get in and build up your endurance and your strength in the sport the right way. I think that is so wonderful. Too many people wait maybe until they've signed up for a marathon or they feel like a real runner to start putting emphasis and effort into it. And I think that does people a huge disservice and probably leads a lot of people away from continuing with running because they're just not doing it properly. They're not maybe approaching their training or nutrition properly. And so they don't enjoy it as much as they could and they get turned off and they quit. We hear from some people who will say, oh, running isn't for me. I'm so bad at it, or I hate running. It sucks. It's so hard. And if we go about it the right way, it doesn't have to suck. It doesn't have to be such a difficult thing. So how to get started? What are some of the ways that we can plant the seeds of being a consistent long-time runner? The first biggest thing is just to consistently show up. So your first goal as a newer runner should be to set small goals that are focused on your action steps versus the results. So rather than setting a goal that is kind of focused on what you want to achieve at the end or sort of focusing on that outcome goal, we want to work on setting process goals and focusing on the daily action steps that we can take to get us closer to where we want to be. So what that might be, for example, would be I am going to do a 30-minute run walk on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. With that kind of goal, we're not focused on what we're going to achieve at the end. We're not focused on what the big picture is with our running. Instead, it's just about what can I do today that is going to help get me closer to where I want to be down the road. The other thing that we want to do in terms of consistency is to actually plan out when we're going to take the action. So we can go even a little bit further to say, I'm going to do a 30-minute walk on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Take that a step further to say, I am going to do that 30-minute run walk Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays before work in the morning. And then we want to think to ourselves, what do I have to do in order to make that happen? So setting an alarm, right? Making sure that we get up with enough time to get ready. Do we need to do something differently with the rest of our morning routine to ensure we have time to fit it in? If we normally get up and maybe we pack our lunch in the morning for work, then perhaps we need to do that the night before so that we have enough time in the morning to get in that run, right? We want to be thinking about what are the things that I have to do? What are the things that I have to accomplish? What are these tasks that are going to go into ensuring that I can meet this goal? Because it's wonderful to have fitness goals and it's wonderful to want to move our bodies more, but it's hard. It can be hard to fit it in, right? We're all very busy. We all have a lot on our plate. And zooming out a little bit from just, I want to take up running, we have to sometimes think about how does that fit into the rest of our lives, and where do we fit it in? How do we fit it in? What are the other things that have to change or shift or be adjusted so that we can make space for this new habit that we want to form? That's number one. So my number one biggest tip for anybody who's just getting started, focus on consistently showing up. Do that first. We also want to make sure that we are avoiding the trap of doing too much too soon and getting ourselves injured. So it's great that we are motivated and excited and we are really loving the first, weeks or months of our running journey. But we want to incorporate strength training, cross training, and rest days from the outset. So rather than, just running every single day until we can't because we get hurt, we want to slowly build up our volume, slowly build up our mileage, take those rest days, include those strength training workouts from the beginning so that we can be a consistent runner long term. So things like run streaking can be really motivating for some of us. Some people do really well with this like every single day habit. But I have a little bit of concern sometimes for people who need to be doing something like a run streak in order to stay consistent, because that's where, again, we can get into a little bit of an all or nothing mindset. And there can be a lot of similarities with people who struggle with balance and moderation with things like eating, and people who struggle with balance and moderation with things like training. So if you find yourself in a little bit of an all or nothing mindset, or if you know that you're a little bit of an all or nothing kind of person, then just acknowledging that sometimes that can be the thing that's keeping us stuck is really important for helping us to move forward. That means being okay with imperfection, but also not totally throwing in the towel if we miss one day of exercise, or we need to take a step back or something like that. We don't want to be just kind of throwing it in the towel and quitting altogether because we can't do it perfectly. So we want to, from the outset, know that we are not going to run every day. We should not run every day. We can't run every single day. And we want to incorporate other types of training, other types of workouts, and of course, rest days right from the get-go. And then, of course, if you are a beginner, then it's also really, really important that you run slow. And we want to be incorporating those easy miles in the beginning so we can build up the cardiovascular endurance, the aerobic base that we need, help us improve things like time on our feet. That mental adjustment to training is so important. And so taking it easy, taking it slow in the beginning is really key. And of course, we need to eat enough to fuel our training, avoid that eat less, move more trap as we start to increase our mileage. And we don't want to be using running just as a method to burn as many calories as we can or as some kind of punishment. We want this to be enjoyable so that it is sustainable. So for more specifically on slow running, easy running, why you need to run slow if you want to eventually run fast, you can check out that episode 9 of this podcast. I go through that in more detail. And of course, in an upcoming episode, we'll also be talking a little bit more on specific tips for beginners. So the last question that we have today is a little bit of a longer one, and it says, my question is, when people talk about eating enough carbs, both before and after running, again, theme here with carbs, for proper fueling, would that still apply to someone who is insulin resistant with PCOS? I keep hearing dietitians talk about fueling properly, but have always been told to limit carbs. As a new runner, I'm not going out and running more than an hour, so I don't know if that makes a difference. I also know and understand nutrition is very individualized, but I am wondering in general. So I think the first really important thing in any conversation we have about nutrition is that some of the advice that we can get can be overall a little bit unhelpful, specifically if we talk about the advice to limit or restrict carbs. We get that maybe from a healthcare provider or someone on the internet, whatever, whoever says it, but they give us the advice that we need to limit or restrict carbs. Compared to what? When we say limit, what does that mean, right? The word limit doesn't mean anything. We have to give some context or some parameters because everyone's different. Everyone's definition of a high carb or low carb diet is going to be really different depending on kind of your biases and your background when it comes to nutrition. And so, for example, in a lot of nutrition research, low carb diets would be defined as anything under 45% of our calories from carbs. So 45% and under would be considered a lower carb diet. Now, if you come from the lower carb eating space, you've read low carb diet books or you've been on low carb diets, you know that for the vast majority of people who promote or recommend low carb diets, that is a very high number to a lot of people. So when we say limit carbs, where are we kind of coming from? Because for some individuals, like a low carb diet, sort of an acceptable low carb diet would be maybe 10% calories max. So this makes not only research and kind of comparing research, what people are recommending and kind of navigating all of this stuff really difficult. So the comment here in the question about nutrition is very individualized is 100% correct. We have to be looking at what are an individual's specific blood work markers showing us, what are their goals, what are their training volumes, and honestly, that stuff is far more important than having a specific diagnosis like PCOS. Because if someone is doing a lot of training, I would be far more concerned about that runner with PCOS underfueling and overtraining and the damage and the problems that can come along with that versus them following a diet that is, a little bit higher in carb, maybe 50 or 55% carb compared to 45% or something. And so, of course, it is very individualized, but as a whole, the other challenge that we have here is that PCOS and nutrition, or, really anything to do with women, female runners, women's health, PCOS, all of this stuff is not very well studied. There are definitely more questions than answers at this point when it comes to diets for some of these health conditions and kind of how to optimize nutrition and all of that. So when we're getting advice or we're seeing information out there that are making very confident kind of blanket statements around what you should or shouldn't eat, what foods are okay or not okay, how much you can and can't have of different things based on having a condition like PCOS, that is something that we really want to take with a grain of salt and really sort of question where that advice is coming from. Because if we look to the research on a lot of these, we just don't have it. What we do know, though, is that really restrictive dieting does not help. And so under eating, not getting in enough fuel for your training demands is always going to be detrimental, is always going to be negative for health and performance. We want to eat enough to fuel our training, eat enough to support whatever workouts we're doing. And of course, that, like everything else, might look slightly different for each of us. Now, as a whole, if we are running less than an hour, if we are doing mostly shorter runs, then yeah, our carbohydrate requirements are going to be less for shorter days versus longer days. So if all of our runs are under an hour, then we don't need to be going super, super high, kind of at the upper end of that carbohydrate range, because we just, aren't doing the training volume to require that. But of course, as our training demands increase, our carbohydrate requirements will also increase. And that would be for anyone, whether or not they have a health condition like PCOS. Now, for management of a lot of chronic conditions, we want to make sure that our fundamentals of nutrition are really dialed in. And that's going to be, like I mentioned before, getting enough protein and fiber, also ensuring that we're hitting our targets for omega-3 fats and all of our vitamins and minerals. So it's all about balance. It's all about sustainability, making sure whatever dietary strategies we're implementing or incorporating are things that we can and want to stick with long term. And then, of course, the big thing that goes along with that is going to be the personalization aspect. So looking at your goals, your needs, maybe even things like your lab work, and making sure that all of that is in alignment with what you need. Because if we're following a diet that is recommended for someone else, or someone else recommends that worked for them, we may need something entirely different. And we want to keep that in mind when, we're picking up information, kind of all over the internet. A lot of what you're going to see and hear out there is not meant for runners. And so that's always something that I want you to think about when you're getting information online or you're reading information online is, as a runner, does this apply to me? Or is it maybe going to be different because of the fact that I'm running, especially if we're talking about runners who put in a lot of volume. So much of what you see out there on the internet is just not meant for you. And that's why, there are dietitians like myself and this podcast here to give you the running specific nutrition and training advice that you need to be successful. So that brings us to the end of our Q&A episode. I hope that you enjoyed it. I hope you found it helpful for answering some of your burning questions around nutrition and training, and especially our conversation today on a lot of things to do with sugar and carbs and figuring out what our eating might look like in that context. So, of course, if you want to learn more about all of this stuff, I am very active on my Instagram. That's kind of my social media channel of choice. So you can find me at Steph the Runner's Dietitian. And if you want to learn more about any of my programs or services, I shared some more details about a couple of those during today's episode. And all of the links to these different programs and options will be available in the show notes. So I want to thank you again for listening. And if you're enjoying the show, then definitely give us a follow, leave us a review. And I would also love it if you shared your favorite episode with your running friends. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
The information on this podcast is for educational purposes only and is not to be used or relied upon for the diagnosis or treatment of any health condition. This information does not create a client-practitioner relationship and should not be used as a substitute for professional medical advice.